It was several years ago that I came here to Addington Cemetery and began doing a master's in anthropology by thesis. This cemetery opened in 1858 in response to the perceived exclusiveness of the Barbados Street Cemetery. This one's going to always have a bit of a special place in my heart, I would say. And today I'm just going to do a little bit of a walkthrough and kind of a behind the scenes type video. And you can expect there to be many more. And of course you can always check out my book, which contains tons of stories about this place. Speaking of my book, it was right here, the monument of the Anderson family used to stand. And I've been really disappointed to come back and see that unfortunately it has toppled over and broken, along with the towering granite Campbell monument which toppled in the earthquakes. It's still really beautiful though. I mean, these yew trees now, you know, getting up there in age and in size. But this cemetery was actually not intended to be my focus of my masters. And of course, if you've checked out any of my work, I went on to change some direction to a broader study of people with my PhD. But I was kind of informed that there were some interesting grave markers here, and hopefully we'll get to them at the back, and you can hear me over that noise, whatever that was. But this was laid out in your classic style as a garden cemetery. The rows are very uniform. It's in a grid-like pattern. There's these beautiful trees and flowers. A lot of yew trees in here. The light being a bit funny. And I mean, you can see now they're really just starting to tower and completely engulf some of the monuments. But it was actually open until 1980, so still open for burial, although not a lot occurred. Essentially, I think it was after the first sort of 3 decades that the cemetery was open, it was pretty much full. But families would purchase plots, and you can see, you know, they've got these little fences around representing the colonial home, and the monuments and the emphasis of the family name, signifying the importance of the colonial family unit and colonial endeavours. But they would purchase those plots, and family members would have been buried here for, you know, probably 2 to 3 generations. And actually there's even some really prominent people that were buried in here. There was the Campbells, which you saw the monument that was toppled over, and obviously, as the name suggests, of Scottish heritage. They actually died in the wreck of, I believe it was the SS Aotearoa. The whole family died when they were on their way back to Edinburgh. He was a doctor. And there's also this monument right here, which is actually a really important one in terms of global history. If you look there, this is the Malcolm family, and also memorialised there is Catherine Wilson Lovell Smith, also known as Kate Shepherd. We'll definitely do more about her in the future. This was an area of land that was purchased by a Scottish colonial by the name of Jane Deans. And yes, if you're familiar with Christchurch, Deans Ave is named after her and her family, probably more so John Deans. And Deans Bush, or Riccarton Bush, or whatever you want to call that, is their land, and the house there they built. You can actually go see their little hut. And funnily, well, ironically, I suppose, they purchased this land, and in 1858 it was her brother that was the first to be interred here. And his grave is up by the entrance, but again, we'll go check that out later, in another video rather. But it's a really great cemetery. You have these examples of, obviously, your sort of stereotype stele and crosses and all your little bits and pieces that you might expect in a cemetery in the UK. And of course these beautiful carvings of angels and urns. But there's also some plants that are pretty unique to here, and materials were used in a slightly different fashion, or different materials were sourced to, you know, kind of take the methods that they had back in Britain and make them work in this new environment. But there's also things like this, the most commonly known as a cabbage tree, which is very much a New Zealand thing, and the flax bushes. Don't think the bamboo was there before, probably. Some kowhai trees, looks like there. So it gives it that unique Aotearoa, New Zealand feel. And it is predominantly a British cemetery with many Scottish people buried here. But there's also hints at the broader migrant past of the nation of the last couple hundred years. And actually, it was this that first led me here. This is the memorial of a man known as Yumji. The Chinese, as I've said in other videos, and you can go check them out, they're often been overlooked in the story of the colonisation of New Zealand, but they've been a pretty integral part. They've been here for just as long as Europeans have, and have, you could argue, the same rights to call it home. They were pretty important in feeding the early colony, and that's something that definitely gets overlooked, but was very, very important, obviously. This is a cemetery that has some really interesting stories, and unfortunately you can see it suffered some pretty hefty damage, in no small part due to the earthquakes that Christchurch has been subject to, but also just time, trees that have grown a little bit too big for their plots. Oh, look at those beautiful birds. Oh, I do love the fauna and the flora, but it really does tell the story of colonial life quite well. Actually, the Moss family memorial here in some ways does that better than any other monument. As you can see, it's got such a large number of people memorialised on what looks to be a modern version of a monument that was either never there or has since gone. But there's so many family members, and more so than that, as you can see at the bottom, not only were they young, but you have stillborns, multiple stillborns, and that was a reality of colonial life. There was the saying that death came swiftly and was indiscriminate, but not fair, and children died a lot in the early Canterbury colony. So it's really not uncommon to find a lot of children in these 19th century cemeteries. But you know, there's something really beautiful about their monuments and the way that the parents and the community really were trying to cope and deal with and justify what was really an unfair situation. Certainly this is with great bias up there as one of my favourite cemeteries of all time I've ever visited. And make sure to stick around for future videos, and I'll explore some of the stories of the individuals and families that are memorialised here.